Hello, Internet. Welcome to the Jupyter Notebook, JupyterLab Widgets dev meeting, weekly dev meeting. It's May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and we'll start off. I'm sorry?
Decaf. I'm sorry, decaf.
We're getting some background noise.
It's background noise.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and start then with, let's see, who's first in the notes? JupyterLab.
All right, this week I've been continuing to work on the extension mechanism and how to rectify all the different ways you could launch a JupyterLab set of assets to include spins. Nick has got some proof of concept for how to handle the merging of installed assets, including in an offline situation. So I'll let him talk to that after. And the biggest change from my standpoint to accommodate that is to instead of having a JSON file that you write to install an extension, you simply put the asset, the tarball, into that folder, and so that upon installing a package, it's just moving a data file. So that can be accomplished through either a wheel or a conda package. So better accommodating that workflow. And also worked on some open beta issues, try to get that number down. I think we're down to about 24 open issues and about 4 open PRs against beta right now, with the biggest technical barrier being the extension system. But I think we're pretty close to having a good answer on that. And go ahead, Darren.
Cool. So there was a PR merged in this week that has been in the works for a couple weeks now, and that's the refactor of the file browser and the document manager. I linked to it in the document because the PR has basically describes all the things that are in there, and some of them might be relevant to people who are writing their own extensions. There's a bunch of file operations commands that are now just globally accessible. They're registered by the document manager, and the creation of new file browsers doesn't necessitate creating new commands anymore, so there's no anonymous commands in there. And there's 2 types of file browser commands that are accessible to everyone. One is a namespace file browser -main, and that's just for the one in the sidebar, things like toggling it or activating it, hiding it, that sort of thing. Those belong to just that one file browser. But then there's others that are namespace file browser : and therefore all file browsers, and there's an instance tracker that will pick basically which file browser to apply that command to, just like any other instance tracker. So it's the same pattern that we use for, say, notebooks or consoles or whatever. So that's in now, and it should make not much of a difference to anyone who wasn't building directly on top of Document Manager. But if you were, there's some new APIs, basically some new file manipulation things that weren't there before. And now I've been thinking about the design of a setting system, which is the next big feature we want to work on. And okay, so broadly speaking, there's a few concepts that I think need to be implemented. One concept is the idea of a settings registry, which is a lot like our command registry, so that each extension can say, I have this key that I care about, and it's going to have data of this sort in it, or a prompt or whatever, some metadata basically, so that we could have a plugin that lets you change the settings for all extensions, for example. And in addition to each extension maybe having its own method of saving its settings, you might want a global one, and that would facilitate that. And then another concept is a setting database, which will have a pretty simple API basically something like fetch all my settings if I'm an extension, or fetch an individual setting if I'm an extension, and save an individual setting or delete them, something like that. It'll be pretty straightforward and hopefully built on the same interface as a state database, so that we can use the same data saving abstractions, basically. Yeah, I mean, this is in the early thinking stages still, but I'll be putting down some code, and I'd really welcome feedback once I have some more to go on. But that's the basic idea where it's headed.
Hi, Darian. So have we, with these changes, have we reintroduced the directory notion to the existing launcher?
Oh yeah, so there is a deprecated attribute on the document manager called CWD, and that is being set. That is being set by the same mechanism as before, by the main sidebar file browser, and it's meant for use for the way we were using it before until we have a better solution. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And it's clearly marked in the documentation that it's deprecated. I discourage anyone who isn't specifically working on launcher or landing from using it, because we don't want to create new dependencies on it. And once we have a better idea of how we deal with this, we'll probably remove that.
Fantastic. And then are we using it in the launcher yet, or is that a separate PR we need to make?
I think we're using it now, because it's not. Yeah, you know what it is? It's not in the launcher. It's that the individual commands, they accept a path argument, but if no path argument is given, they default to the document manager or CWD.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, sounds like a good temporary solution until we refactor the launcher stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Great.
Ian, I guess.
Sure. I've been traveling this week. Can you read that? No.
Ian, you're pretty garbled.
That's not great.
Everyone to...
Ian, do you want to try calling in on your phone? Yeah, go to the next.
Doing that. Well, I have a question for Steve about extensions. This last week, I've been doing a lot of updating of widgets, so basically making a lot of extensions for JupyterLab. And one common case that I see is I have a JavaScript library that I want to expose somehow in JupyterLab. So I can't put the lab extension inside the JavaScript library because the extension mechanism expects the default export to be the extension properties. And so I have to make a new JavaScript package in order to expose the extension to JupyterLab. That means that any change I make to the JavaScript library that I'm wrapping, I have to somehow release or install with the file path, and then reinstall the extension. I haven't tried linking the extension, but it's kind of an awkward workflow. If I'm making an extension that essentially is a very basic light wrapper around JavaScript library, because either I have to hard code a dependency with a path, which means that git diff is always showing a difference with what I should be pushing up to the repo, or I have to keep publishing versions of my JavaScript library as I'm wrapping it with the extension. And
so this is not a problem that's unique to our extension system. This is anytime you're trying to simultaneously develop two independent NPM packages and use them in the same application, whether it's a web app, whether it's JupyterLab, whether it's any. Can't hear you, Jason.
My network went down, sorry. But okay. I saw you were talking there for a second.
Yeah, so I was saying that this isn't really an issue that's unique to JupyterLab extensions. You'll run into this anytime you're trying to simultaneously develop two independent NPM packages that depend on one another.
That's right.
And the way that we've solved this was by using Lerna and pull everything into the same repo. Right, because that was basically the issue we were having with Phosphor initially, having them in separate packages. It was almost impossible to develop them, the independent packages simultaneously.
Yeah.
So this is just basically a repeat of that problem as expressed by, you're just running into it in the course of trying to develop your extension on the library at the same time.
Yes. So what I'm asking for is suggestions for workflow, or I had a suggestion, but I doubt it's, yeah, I'd like to hear suggestions.
Well, so maybe it would be appropriate for me to jump in and do a little screen share demo of what, so if that's okay, Jason?
Sure. I'm happy to hear any suggestions. It did sound like Chris was in the middle of a suggestion.
Yeah. So my initial suggestion, just in terms of a high level thing, but before we jump into the specifics of authoring JupyterLab extensions, is that you could either pull everything into the same repo and use Lerna to manage them until you're done developing things simultaneously, and then break them out into separate repositories. If that's what you wanted to do, or do something like use a Git submodule so that you could do both of them together. But again, that's a suggestion that's independent of the fact that you're authoring a JupyterLab extension. It's just more of a development option for simultaneously developing independent packages.
Right. Thanks.
Awesome.
So one suggestion that I'm not very happy with, because it's not very clean and separating, is if the JupyterLab metadata in the package JSON allowed me to specify the import in the package to use for the JupyterLab extension data, then it allows me to combine the JupyterLab extension with the package. It's not clean, but it does collapse everything into a single package.
Yeah, that could potentially be interesting if it was somehow namespaced inside of there. I mean, I think that's where we were before. You actually gave the full name of your AMD path that you wanted, which brought all the other AMD problems. But I mean, yeah, you could easily ship whatever. Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it would be a stretch to have a key that you could put in your metadata, which is an exported name of the thing that is your array of plugins.
Yeah, so if as ours was today, if it was, JupyterLab extension : true, that's a default. But if it was JupyterLab : name a something, it would import that. Or if it was an object or whatever, we decide however it works.
Or it could be just a file in the package to import. So
no, we don't want to do that, because we want to bundle up the whole package. If we just go with a file, we might webpack up not enough stuff. And the whole point is we want to treat the thing of unit of deduplication as the package.
Right. So the nice thing about specifying a file to import, an import file, and then just using the default exports to that, I guess the workflow there would be the file is not imported into index.js, but the file does import index.js. So it does export the entire package and the wrapper, and that's what you're exporting. And that's what you're importing and use for JupyterLab. So you can make that work just by making sure that the file that you're exporting the JupyterLab plugin sits above the actual module exports. But that's a convention, and again, it's still a little bit unclean. It's convenient, but it's unclean because it means now your now your JavaScript library depends on the various JupyterLab exports. So that's what bothers me about the workflow, but it does make things a lot more convenient. Nick,
yeah, if I were in your position, the first thing I would do right now is probably install my JS library as a Git submodule into my extension package, and then manage it. Just try to set it up to manage it with Lerna.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who do that. You know, Angel.
Yeah, Jason, I'm not sure if what I have been working on handles the case that you're talking about, but maybe it's worth taking a look. Like if we can potentially here while we're doing this, create a case of that might be interesting to look at, but I haven't tried that specific case yet. I've just been concentrating on the extensions themselves. My thinking towards that is that you might, have that is the import mechanism that you use. You use the JupyterLab plugin as the thing that will, the token that it gives back has an expected API on top of it, but that's not very clean either. So, but all right, let me fire up. Let's see if this works.
Yeah, again, I think the most convenient workflow that I see right now is to npm install from my file path into my JupyterLab and npm save from a file path into my JupyterLab extension. And then every time I install the extension internally on my computer, it'll just reference the file path on my computer, which is fine. I just have to remember to not git commit that. Instead, commit the actual version number when I actually push something out from the wrapped module.
Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna come at it from a slightly different angle. So basically, what we decide, or a proposal has been put forward that if we move the runtime reproducibility of a JupyterLab, a specific JupyterLab build, whether it's the main one that's distributed along with the Python package or the Conda package or system manager package, or one that is created as a result of user interaction by adding extensions or as a custom distro. So I'll jump right real quick to it. This doesn't have, obviously doesn't work yet, but it's where we're going. So this is a little simple example that's derived from the example that's in the tests. So this is the new infrastructure that I tried to keep the API as similar as possible. It's got all the verbosity turned off, so I can have it dump out all the Webpack junk. But so I had just gone in and deleted my share JupyterLab folder. This is completely empty. This is going to force the copy of the assets that are in the JupyterLab directory in the repo into share. So now I've got a fresh, pristine environment there. It's doing some additional Yarn stuff, like putting a Yarn RC that does the offline mirroring and all that stuff, and we'll get to that in a sec. Okay, so 40 seconds later, I have a brand new offline reproducible build environment for everything in JupyterLab. So it's really hard for me to demonstrate that because I can't turn my network off and continue to talk to you lovely people. But I could turn off my network now and successfully do a JupyterLab build because I just opted into, hey, you want runtime builds by adding an extension. So that was 39 seconds. And if I reload my page now, there it is the example that I just made that was linked at runtime. So that's very exciting. So now the joke is that if I open up a terminal, whoa, yeah, gotta be nice. Some rangy action. All right, so if I start this up, this is now going to start watching with all end user time installed packages, my thing. And when I've got it in watch, it doesn't do any capturing. Sometimes we have to capture the output of various commands. But okay, so it's watching. The build is still going to take 30 seconds or whatever the first time out. The network stuff is basically nil. It didn't really do anything to the network in trying to do this. And there's my first build. So if we restart, we should see exactly the same thing. It's still here. Okay. So now if we go back into here and we say, that's not enough celebration. I need much more celebration. If I rerun that, we'll see over here that it did, oops, I was not fast enough. It just rebuilt the entire application in 2 seconds. And if I reload the page, there's my first celebration, but there's my much larger celebration. So now if I wanted to unlink this. I can take that right off. And since I have a watch going, I can also ask for things to not start their own build. And maybe there's some way to do a semaphore or mutex or something that doesn't do that. But this is going to go in, remove that from the local build file, remove it from the metadata, and regenerate the template folder. And regenerate the template. Oh, I just relinked it. That doesn't do anything. Unlink. Haha. So, you know, not 0 time, but close to 0 time. And that will have triggered an update to the template. So now if I save this, might as well, then my celebration is gone and there's nothing in particular happening. I can bring that back in another, I don't know, couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Da, da, da.
Oh, so it was there. He didn't join the
There we go. Okay, so that finished. Oh, and now I forgot to turn the build off, so that's what it would have done inside of there. Okay, so that is with a very simple one. If one of the key things that we had to overcome was the deduplication process. And so right now, I think if I unlink it with no build, I got a little function that'll count how many times that I have declared widget. So phosphor widget, that is the actual line inside of the bundle. That is where widget was defined. With a lot of the approaches that I tried, if I was to change my example here to let var widget equals require at phosphor widgets dot widget, and let's just do something with it. Var w equals new widget and application shell add to left area widget. What do I need on there? An ID.
Oh, yeah?
And let's put a title.label. Okay, so the way that this worked before, just make sure I didn't leave it in unlinked state. The way this worked before, this would have generated two copies of phosphor widgets inside of my application, which is obviously not very good. It also does tell me that I did just add this new one right here. So if I pop back into my thing that will list, where did I put that? This guy right here, I still have exactly one copy of widget inside of there. So it has done the deduplication at the Webpack level. I assume that if you did have a bunch of non-flat installable things, that they would get terribly angry. But for the most part, I find this pretty compelling. So what this has actually done under the hood is in my environment here, it now has created this extra, oh, it's in a dot directory. Okay, bad demo. If we instead go to that location on disk here, ends dev share JupyterLab, we see that there's this mirror in it. And this is a super compacted offline mirror of all of the crap that was needed off of NPM in order to reproduce that build. And that information, it's not nothing, but it turns out being 11 megabytes because it strips out all your PDFs and all your non-essential images and everything like that. And the actual extension that I've been building, there's none in here because I didn't install them. I linked them, and under the hood, it actually did an npm or yarn link to do all of that linking kind of stuff. So, end of the day, you end up with something that to show the cake. It's loaded, and there is my new thing that I did to the page. So if we didn't like what that was called, what the hell is my file? Let's call it something. This is a nice extension, and I run that, and I save, and I don't even have to wait for it to finish loading. And this is a nice extension. So we got that down to about, from 30 or 40 seconds, it's down to about 2 seconds. And if you do a link, it'll take advantage of your local files. If you do an install, it won't. So that's what I got done in the last 2 days. I have not yet actually built the conda packages or anything like that, or, an package that would actually encapsulate that activity, but I think I'm pretty close to that as well. So sorry if that was kind of a heavy.
Nick, I think, so I think my ideal workflow would be to use something like that, or something like essentially what Learn is doing. So JupyterLab extension link my library that I'm wrapping as well as the extension. And if there was a way to do a link of the wrapped library as well as the extension, then essentially JupyterLab's building from my dev version of the library that I'm wrapping as well as the dev version of the extension. So if I can populate your local cache with my library, or even better is to link the library that I'm wrapping.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth exploring. So right now, it probably won't do that because it's expecting to only get extensions. And so it does not expose all of the core underlying machinery. So that's just, that's the next thing to look at.
Right, so JupyterLab extension link, I haven't used that very much. I've just been installing the extension.
This is not, no. This is
I know
not
that's not that, but my question is, JupyterLab extension link, does that require an extension package, or is it just a generic NPM link into the dependencies that we're going to use to build JupyterLab?
As it stands today, it verifies that it has that metadata.
Okay, so if we didn't verify it had the metadata, so I could link in whatever library.
What we could do is check for the metadata and then handle it appropriately.
Okay.
It either becomes part of the manifest or just another linked item.
Right. Okay. I didn't realize there was more than, Okay. So you need to put it in the manifest if it's an extension. If it's not an extension, and then for anything you're linking, just put it into the dependencies, the node modules directory. I mean, that might completely solve my workflow or my issues.
Yeah, I mean, as Steve and I were talking, like, one of the best cases out there would be something like DQplot, because, it's an extension of an extension.
That's exactly one of the extensions I was doing. DQplot, Py3.js, etc. Yeah.
Py3.js is probably worse. Yeah, that's probably because, do they even use modules? Anyhow, so that's definitely worth exploring, is how that would evolve there.
But at the same time, Sylvan and I have also had lots of conversations about doing offline installs. So I'm really glad for the work that you're doing, and with Yarn and some of the offline caching that you're doing.
But
sorry.
One broad question I have about this, and that is, I think our intention is to, and Sylvan had worked on this, was to split out the server component of the notebook into something separate, and when we do that, to refactor its own basically configuration system, moving towards more of a conf.d style approach. And I guess the thing we're trying to do is not have multiple breaks in how the server and front ends are configured. And I want us to be aware of that, like that what we're building now is either that we have a clear understanding of the breaks that are going to be required between what we implement for the beta or 1.0 and what we end up with once the server has been refactored in its configuration system.
So I'm actively talking to Min about that on an issue in JupyterLab, one of the beta issues. And I think we're converging on being able to detect if you're in a virtual environment, and if so, ignore the user level config altogether, so that we completely remove this friction. And that would work for both JupyterLab and any other existing Traitlet components.
But there's still the question of being able to enable, disable, configure things without editing files, but being able to just drop data files into a directory. And that we can't do that without breaking APIs, breaking our configuration APIs. So it's less has to do with the context, the different contexts of configuration, but with changing how configuration works in general.
So yeah, server extensions still require that friction, but I don't think that should mean that we have to absorb that as well in lab extensions.
Right, but I guess what I want to make sure of is eventually we're going to fix that with the server extensions, and I don't want us to end up with two essentially similar things that aren't exactly the same. Now, who knows? Maybe the new server extension approach can follow what we're doing here, or be consistent with it. But I don't want us to complicate things even further in what we're doing now. I'd like to, 2 years from now, I'd love it if we could have a single consistent configuration story for our front ends and the server, rather than saying, oh, well, for historical reasons, the server does this now and JupyterLab does this, except for when it's already horrifically complicated, and I don't want it to become more so.
I mean, JupyterLab's pushing forward in the direction we need to go, but it still is alpha. And so if we get the Jupyter server extensions working, like, we can change things if we need to, or these experiments will feed into the Jupyter server configuration.
And I'm not sure. I basically just want people to be aware of this, that at some point we plan on updating the server, to have the server as a separate standalone project independent of the notebook front end, the classic notebook front end, but two, that new server will have hopefully a different config system along these same lines. And so it's just important to be aware of it and make sure that we're all synchronized on both those fronts. But it's really encouraging to see these things moving forward. And Nick, one thing that I think what you're working on gets us close to is more of the experience like Visual Studio Code offers, where if you install an extension, it doesn't get enabled immediately. It basically kicks off a build, and when it's ready to install, it notifies you in the UI. You click reload, and it reloads a window, and you never, the latency is completely hidden. It works fairly well, so it looks great.
Right, with the fallback position of implicit in the way that we are thinking about how the build stuff would work, it would make it trivial for an extension remixer, someone that just is picking stuff off the shelf, to make that, publish it as a dumb bunch of static files, and someone else would be able to use that, right? So, we don't if this configuration system is so flexible that it still needs a, whole front end build chain all the time, then that's not great for users. But if we can, have some training wheels to get you on there, it's also bad if you can't try this stuff out without actually having a real package, right? So it's got to somehow play correctly with the existing, distutils environment. So yeah, I'm excited to see how we make that work on the Python side as well.
Great.
My internet keeps dropping out, so can someone else take over moving the meeting along, just so that if I drop out for some reason, I'm not letting things hang here.
It looks like Ian is next.
Can you guys hear me now? I'm dialed in on a phone.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, so I've been traveling this week, so not a whole lot of progress, but I've been chipping away at the chat box that I opened up, the chat box PR I opened up last week. So now we've got drag and drop of chat entries into the notebook as markdown cells. And I also have made some progress towards implementing paging so that if you've got a really long chat box entry, you don't have to render all those at the same time, so you can scroll up and it'll just load back in history. So I've got some work to do in terms of writing tests for it, but then maybe some eyes on that would be useful.
And Ian, I've been way out of line on this, Ian, or offline on this, not out of line. I'm about to get out of line. When are we going to have another backend than the Google storage thing? Like, I can't non-starter can't start writing code against that.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the stuff that's going into JupyterLab master is in no way dependent on Google Drive, and we've been working hard to try to abstract away all that stuff. So I've been doing some playing with having a sort of Derby racer backend, but that is very much in the playing stages right now. I know you've mentioned that you've used that before, so if you want to weigh in on some of that stuff, your contributions would be valued. But that's not in nearly so advanced a state as the Google Drive-based backend.
Okay, good answer. Yeah, I mean, happy to talk about that. We probably wouldn't want all of Derby because it has too much stuff.
Yeah. So right now I've only used. Right now I'm basing this off. The experiments I've done have been based off of Racer, not Derby.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we can circle back up on that. That's really exciting. But I'm not getting funded to do that, so it would be purely for my personal benefit.
Great. I guess I've got anything else from your side, Ian?
No, that should be it.
Okay. I'm next on the agenda. So we've just completed a major refactor of the output area cells and notebook packages in JupyterLab. In particular, the parts of the code base relating to content factories for widgets. And a couple things that are worth mentioning. We're moving away from having widget suffixes on class names that subclass from widget. So rather than foo widget, we're using foo now. The most important thing is that the content factory hierarchy has been simplified. So in our sort of parlance, the content factory is an object that a class uses to create child content, and it allows the user of a class to customize content of a class. So for example, if you're creating a cell and you want to have a custom prompt, you can pass in a factory that has a factory method, create input prompt, and it will allow you to customize that. And our current approach is that the hierarchy of sort of factories for the output area, cell, notebook, and notebook panel is done through subclassing. So the cell content factory subclasses that of the output area, and the notebook subclasses that of the cell. So at the end of the day, you end up with a single content factory that has all the methods that you would need for building any of those entities within a certain part of the code base. So the notebook has that. And then also I should mention, I also did this on the console as it relied on all the refactored output area and cell. And just a few other things. So there's been questions about when we have a content factory. Previously, we'd been using both contentFactory.iOptions and iContentFactoryOptions to indicate the iOptions object for those content factories. And in talking with Chris, we felt like embracing the nesting was a better approach. And so the cases where we had named things iContentFactoryOptions have been converted to contentFactory.iOptions. Probably other big thing related to this is CSS class naming. And I've tried to update the CSS Markdown document in our tutorial directory with some notes on that. The big, and there's still some questions. Some of the big questions are, so for example, I'll just use a concrete example. If you have an output area class in TypeScript, our rules would specify that you have a CSS class on that DOM node JP-output area. And the question is, when that output area gets added to a cell, does it get an additional class named JP-cell-lowercase output or output area? And there's definitely some reasons why you would want to add that extra class. Chris brought some of those up. One is that sometimes the direct or the indirect descendant selectors aren't sufficient to target that element. And this is a more specific way of targeting output areas that are children of cells. And Chris runs into this in Phosphor when you have highly nested panels inside panels or in the dock area, things like that. But we've been doing it in contexts where we don't have that high degree of nesting. And I think that the other area and where I wanted to bring it up as still a remaining question is adding a class like JP-cell-output allows you to style that output in a way that doesn't depend on the implementation of the output. And I understand that model. The question I'd like to ask is this: would we want to move to a model where we consider the CSS class on a widget that has a corresponding interface to be part of that interface? So would we want to say, if an output area has an interface, that the CSS class on the default implementation is part of the interface, and that allows us to remove the often redundant selectors like, or CSS classes such as JP-cell-output, and reserve that case for only the situation where we have highly nested things and we need more specificity in the selectors.
I'd be -1 on that because somebody's going to create a different implementation of that thing and put the class name on it. And you're going to be looking through the DOM and being like, okay, where is this class defined? And you're going to start grepping for that class name, and you're not going to find it because this person's implementation is named something completely different. I don't think having redundancy in class names is necessarily a bad thing. The way that we have it set up now, it allows you to do everything you want to do. And it's a very consistent rule to remember when you're defining your own classes. Like if you have a named TypeScript class, you add that named class to the class name of the widget, and that's just the rule, and it's easy to remember. And like having extra redundancy in the CSS class names doesn't hurt us. And I think what you're proposing is actually a more difficult mental model to remember about what you have to do and when you have to do it.
Yeah, so the one place where we're running into problems, though, is where so for example, an output area should be useful outside of a cell. And having both a JP-output area and a JP-cell-output area selector, when we're writing CSS, it's often not clear to the person writing CSS which of those two selectors to target. And so we end up putting core styling on output area on the wrong selector, on the cell selector. And so when you use output area alone, it doesn't work. Like the styles aren't all there that should be there. And if we can be disciplined about that, then I think that's fine. There's no harm in adding extra CSS selectors in principle, except if you start to use those extra ones in a way that makes other CSS selectors
I mean, if the problem is you want some styles to apply to all implementations of an object, irrespective of where those implementations are used, like irrespective of the context in which they are used, then add the interface name that you're implementing to your class. Like when you create this widget, add your own dedicated class name for your actual TypeScript class name, but also add the interface name that you're implementing to the class name, and then style based on those interface names rather than the class names.
Got it. So that would be a change. So basically what that's saying is a class like output area would have a CSS class gp-i output area and jp-output area. And when we write CSS, the things that we want to apply to all output areas, we would put on the jp-i output area.
But you have to be really careful with that, because once your CSS becomes part of your interface, then your DOM structure now is part of your public interface.
Well, so I think our current approach right now, from the extension perspective, is that the only public thing in our CSS and theming is the variable names in our variables.css.
Good.
And I think that needs to be our public message. This is more a question for our own selves. Like when we need to use a cell in different contexts, or we need to use an output area in different contexts. And this is also something to keep in mind, that we ourselves are not likely going to ever have another implementation of an output area. And so the other part of this is, it feels like we're over designing this for a case that we would explicitly not allow right now, because we tell people, look, our CSS is not public. And I agree with Jason, like putting I output area on a class definitely suggests that it becomes.
Right, and that's a good point, because if somebody's going to create another implementation of that, then the styling that you define for those I output areas, that becomes the convention, is going to apply to their implementation, which might have a completely different DOM structure. So, like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm still like, so my point is that if you want styles to apply to all implementations of a thing, irrespective of their context, then I still think that's the right thing to do in terms of adding the interface name. But it doesn't sound like that's what you want. It sounds like what you want is styles to apply to all instances of your output area widget or our output area widget, the concrete thing, irrespective of the context in which it is used. And in that case, just use you already have that ability. You just use the JP output area, the actual widget name, the TypeScript class name. I think that's fine.
You just need more discipline. Okay, so let's do whatever we can to help the user have that discipline. But yeah, figuring out which CSS selector to target can be a hard problem, but it's part of just making sure you're talking about the thing that you think you're talking about.
Yeah, and the other place where this shows up is we have a lot of styles that are applied. So they would be applied on something like gp-shell-output rather than on gp-shell space .gp-output area.
Well, and that's where with CSS it gets tricky when you start nesting selectors, because then you run into possible precedence issues and things like that. And there's conventions for labeling things with CSS without nesting anything. So it's a completely flat namespace, and essentially your nesting becomes your actual string name with some delimiters. And we start to do that, but we also are starting to nest selectors, and that's where it's getting really confusing.
Yep, exactly. So I don't have a solution. I at least wanted to bring these questions up. I added some notes to the documentation, and we'll probably have to keep thinking and iterating on it. And Jason, iPyWidgets.
Yeah, so I've been in San Francisco talking to lots of people about widgets and stuff, but since we released the alpha, we really turned attention to the docs and testing, and the testing got up to speed with I think we're getting the framework in place for testing. We've made some good progress on that. And a question: our docs apparently have it can be updated now since TypeDoc is updated. Is that right? I saw the PRs, Steve. So TypeDoc works perfectly with 2.3. Okay. Like read only works. Okay, but read only, and does it recognize some of these things?
So the only issue was that it's not using the same module resolution as TypeScript was. Okay. And so it got confused by the learn of symlinking, I think is what happened. So what we had to do, the concession we had to make in Phosphor was that we created a separate TD options file that adds more, that forces TypeScript to only look at node modules surface level for Phosphor packages. So it's not getting mixed up in the symlinks anymore. But other than that, yeah, everything worked. So yeah, we just had to help them out because the TypeDoc is actually modifying the TypeScript compiler. So we don't know exactly what they did that would cause TypeDoc to fail, but TypeScript to work with the same version of TypeScript. So it's not a different version, but we were able to at least hack around it, and it's confined to when you run the docs, so it doesn't affect the core TS config. So that was an acceptable compromise for now.
Okay. I mean, yeah, we did even before have a separate config that was loaded for TypeDoc, but
right, the separate config is not what was the problem. It was forcing the compiler to do something. But again, it's only confined to when you run the docs. So
okay, so I probably won't see that if I'm not using Lerna, which is great. Okay, so we might have some API level documentation for widgets now.
And then Jason, did you try the new Jupyter Alabaster theme?
No, I haven't looked at all at the building the docs. Yeah, so I was thinking just the API level documentation. I haven't even got into the Sphinx documentation. Right now, that's still a black box to me. Sylvan was the one that was working on it a while ago. So,
and then for this release of IPyWidgets, how has it been refactored into different components?
Yeah, so we haven't done any refactoring as of yet, other than the refactoring we already had in place. So we haven't refactored Jupyter.js widgets yet. We'd like to refactor, split the managers out. So we have the embed manager and the base widget manager away from the implementation. And there were thoughts maybe even putting the core widget classes either by themselves or maybe with the manager as part of sort of the spec, and then have the slider and the text box, etc., in their own package. I think I have a solution that I'm satisfied with for the time being without refactoring everything. So we might release and then refactor, but right now I'm concentrating more on the testing.
Okay, great. All right, so that looks like we're at the end of the agenda, and we're also at the end of the hour. Any other last topics before we shut off the recording?
I'll sneak one thing in there. So Chrome Headless is now generally available inside of the Canary stuff. Oh, I saw some fingers go up, and they weren't the bad ones. And so I have started working on my little gimmicky niobium, which is the parallel. It's just one over from Chromium right there, and its signal is NB, and it's 41, so it's almost the answer. And yeah, I know, it just keeps coming. And it seg faults like crazy, but it works. So I can do offline PDF, no XF, VFB, HTML output from NBConvert, observing the thing, and I'm playing with hosting a lab and then controlling lab to generate PDF screens because you can access it.
And
so
this would be like PDF generated with the Altair visualization and the widgets, etc., like exactly what you see on the screen, right?
Whatever Chrome supports that day.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
So
honestly, I'm wondering if we want to create a like targeting PDF generation of notebooks, if we would want to create a custom application that, it's not the full-blown JupyterLab, but that just literally renders the notebook itself to make it really easy to grab that.
Okay, like an NB convert, essentially. That would take a notebook, render it using Chrome, and then snapshot it.
Something like that.
With the ultra violent form of that being takes all this offline build machinery, builds you a JupyterLab and stuffs it into the HTML, so that you've got a single standalone HTML that includes not only its data but also its runtime. Because why not? You can do it. So anyhow, but I want to get those PDFs first, right? Like just the way that they should be, so that it works offline, and we can start because, then we could actually think about it on MBViewer, right? We could actually start doing the PDF builds, which is freaky as hell. But like once they're getting jammed up into S3 or IPFS or who cares where DAT, whatever, why not? Why not? So very exciting stuff, but got to get over all the seg faults first.
Great. Thanks for working on that.
Do you think there's a way, I don't know if this is even possible, but even in a live JupyterLab instance, download as PDF that takes a snapshot from Chrome rather than running through NB convert?
You can't, unless you are working in a very robust mode, you can't get access to that rendering layer.
Okay.
So that was typically reserved for like the Qt layer of the Qt web frame. So I'm not sure if you can a priori do that just because you got some Chrome. You might need more programmatic access to it.
Got it.
But I think that's what's going to land, right? I think everybody that has Chrome and Chromium is going to be able to command it once you open a debug port.
I was thinking that the headless, you could only access it through the debugging. So if I was just running JupyterLab, I don't know if I have access to the debugger at that level to be able to save as PDF. Yeah, okay.
And it's a giant JSON IDL file. Actually, is probably worth digging into. Their protocol.json is like the business.
So Electron exposes an API for PDF generation, and I know you hate Electron, but it's one benefit is that it's.
We do not hate Electron. Let's just put that.
No, I was talking to Nick. Earlier. Yeah.
No,
sorry.
I love Electron. It just doesn't solve problems that I have. Like,
so I implemented this exact thing in Interact, and it was super easy because Electron just basically has an export to PDF function, and it just captures the DOM and renders it for you as a PDF.
That's good to know.
So we'll have that with our JupyterLab Electron app.
Well, and I'm always gonna and I'll keep plugging along. Like I still want to be able to do that against the Qt that you get from Anaconda. Is like that's the long game, because I don't trust Chrome as a long-term solution. But once it's something that in a package manager that we can rely on. I just got a big thumb from Darian. He showed up just to say hi. So anyhow, but that's a whole other story. The Qt web frame is not a happy place to be sometimes, or web engine. But sorry to derail things.
No, we definitely need a story for web-based deployments of all this stuff in PDF generation, like Jupyter Hub deployments. Like there's no, it would be fantastic if we could get this working in Electron, but yeah. Cool. All right. Any other last thoughts before we close things down? Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye, Internet. We will see you all next week.